a canvas of wonder. Let curiosity be your guide to explore.
Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. We've actually crafted this specifically for you. And if you're joining us today, you probably already know our mission here. We are trying to settle, well, really one of the most fundamental age-old debates in human history.
Right, the classic question. Is success born or is it made?
Exactly. And to get to the bottom of this, we are pulling from a really, truly fascinating stack of source material. We're primarily looking at a comprehensive summary of psychologist Angela Duckworth's landmark book, Grit.
But we aren't stopping there, which is great.
No, we're not. We are layering in some heavy-hitting critiques, brilliant insights from a whole ecosystem of major thinkers, people like Cal Newport, Carol Dweck, Anders Ericsson, and Simon Sinek.
It's a phenomenal collection of ideas, honestly.
Right.
We are essentially getting a complete 360-degree view of what it actually takes to succeed over the long haul. We're not just looking at the cheerleading side of success.
Right, the motivational poster stuff.
Exactly. We are looking at the friction, the math, and the psychological traps that we all fall into.
And it challenges something we all do, usually without even realizing it. Because as a society, we absolutely worship natural geniuses. I mean, we love the idea of the effortless prodigy.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
The person who just walks onto a court or sits down at a piano and creates magic without breaking a single sweat.
Yes. But today, we're going to uncover why that obsession is actually a psychological trap. It is a myth that we subconsciously use to excuse our own failures. Okay, let's unpack this. Duckworth defines grit as a very specific combination of two things: passion and perseverance.
Right.
It's not just working hard, because, I mean, anybody can work hard for a weekend. Grit is working hard in a consistent direction over years.
And if you want a real-world stress test of that definition, you have to look at Duckworth's foundational research at West Point.
The military academy.
Yes, they have this infamous, just brutal 7-week boot camp called Beast Barracks. It is specifically designed to push cadets to their absolute physical, mental, and emotional limits.
Just break them down entirely.
Yeah, precisely. Now, historically, West Point tried to predict which cadets would survive this grueling initiation by looking at their traditional admissions criteria. You know, perfect SAP scores, high school class rank, outstanding physical fitness test results.
Which makes sense on paper. You'd assume the smartest, fastest, strongest kids would obviously be the ones left standing.
But those metrics completely fell apart. They utterly failed. The admissions data could not predict who would drop out when things got incredibly difficult.
Wow.
Yeah, the kid who could run a perfect mile might just quit on day 4, while a seemingly average recruit pushed all the way through. The only reliable predictor of who would actually make it through Beast Barracks was Duckworth's Grit questionnaire.
So it wasn't about the raw materials they showed up with.
Not at all. It was about their psychological endurance.
I think about that every time I see someone highly credentialed just completely flame out under pressure. And it perfectly illustrates Duckworth's quasi-mathematical formula for success. She actually breaks it down into 2 equations.
The effort.
Right. First, skill equals effort multiplied by talent. So your raw talent acts as an accelerator. If you have talent and you apply effort, you develop a skill faster than someone else.
Makes sense.
But here is the second equation. Achievement equals effort multiplied by skill.
Which means effort effectively counts twice.
Exactly. Talent gets you your baseline skill faster, but effort is what actually builds the skill. And then effort is required again to apply that skill to create an actual achievement. You can't just be skilled, you have to do something with it.
Which naturally makes you wonder, if the math clearly shows that effort counts twice as much in the long run, why do we constantly fixate on raw talent?
Right, why the obsession?
The texts point to an evolutionary emotion-based naturalness bias. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche actually argued that we mythologize natural talent as a self-protective instinct.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Think about it. If you look at a brilliant athlete or an incredible musician and say, well, they're just a natural, they were born with it, it completely lets you off the hook.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, you don't have to feel bad about your own lack of achievement because, hey, you simply weren't born with that magic genetic gift. It is a highly comfortable, insulating excuse.
But that comfortable excuse has a really dark side when you apply it to the real world. Just look at the Enron scandal.
Oh, yeah. A perfect example.
The materials note that Enron was absolutely obsessed with this idea of superstar talent. They worshipped the smartest guys in the room. And they had this terrifying internal policy known as rank and yank.
Rank and yank, just the name is brutal.
It really is. They would automatically fire the bottom 15% of their performers every single year. It didn't matter if that bottom 15% was actually doing okay, solid work. They just wanted to continuously weed out the untalented.
And we know how that ended. It created this incredibly toxic, narcissistic culture. People weren't focused on doing solid, sustainable work.
Or collaborating, I imagine.
Zero collaboration.
Yeah.
Everyone was just trying to look like a genius to survive the next round of cuts. Yeah. It incentivized fraud over grit, and it ultimately doomed the entire company.
So if you're listening to this, think about your own workplace. Are you being evaluated on your consistent effort and growth? Or is there a toxic pressure to just instantly look like the smartest person in the room?
It's a great reality check.
It is, but I do want to push back on Duckworth just a bit here because the sources are definitely not a monolith. Is talent really just a minor footnote?
What's fascinating here is that we have to balance Duckworth's equation with the critics who argue that talent matters a lot more than she admits. Take the chess grandmaster Magnus Carlsen, for example.
Okay.
Studies estimate that he put in significantly fewer hours of deliberate practice than his peers, yet he utterly dominates the global chess world.
Why is that?
Because of an outsized, undeniable innate talent for spatial reasoning and memory.
Got it.
Or look at the large-scale study on the UK's standardized high school exams, the GCSEs. Researchers looked at those test results and found that grit only accounted for 0.5% of test success.
Wait, 0.5%.
0.5%, while raw intelligence accounted for 40%.
That is a staggering difference. Though, to be fair, the text does note that this heavily contrasts with something like the National Spelling Bee,
Right.
where rote memorization and relentlessly studying obscure language roots heavily rewards grit over pure logic. So the arena absolutely dictates whether talent or grit takes the lead.
It does. And we also have to consider Nassim Nicholas Taleb's argument, which kind of throws a wrench into both sides.
What does he say?
He argues that we frequently look at highly successful people and mistake pure luck for both talent and grit.
Ah, luck.
Yeah, we see someone at the top and assume they worked harder or were simply smarter, but sometimes they just had fortuitous early access to a business contract, or they happened to meet the right mentor at exactly the right time. We reverse engineer a narrative of grit when really they just got lucky early on and that luck compounded.
That is such a vital reality check for anyone comparing their own progress to a billionaire or a celebrity. But for the things in our lives that we can actually control, the sources map out how grit naturally develops. It all starts with that initial spark of interest. Stage 1.
Right. Now, we've all been handed the cliche advice to follow your passion. And usually we imagine that as a sudden lightning bolt of destiny. You just wake up one day and realize you are meant to be an architect.
Which rarely happens.
Almost never. The research shows grit actually starts as playful, somewhat messy exploration. It's about trying a bunch of things. The psychologist Meg Jay calls this having a productive identity crisis in your 20s.
I love that phrase.
It's great.
Yeah.
You figure out what you like by actively doing things in the real world, not just sitting in a room reflecting on your inner desires.
But Cal Newport completely dismantles that idea of following your passion.
Oh, he hates that advice.
He argues we should completely ignore it. Newport points out that only about 4% of people have pre-existing interests that naturally translate into a viable career.
4% is tiny.
So instead of frantically searching for a passion, he says you should focus on building rare, valuable skills first. Put your head down, do the work, and master something difficult.
Skill first, passion later. Exactly. Once you master a rare skill, you gain autonomy, you gain respect, and you gain control over your career. And that lifestyle generates the passion. You don't start with passion. You earn it through the hard work of building competence.
That flips the entire cultural narrative upside down. I love that. But let's say you do find that focus, whether you explored your way into it or skilled your way into it. Eventually, that honeymoon phase ends.
Always does.
The playful exploration stops and you hit a wall. And that brings us to the actual grind of practice. But we are not talking about just putting in the hours. The sources highlight Anders Ericsson's concept of deliberate practice.
Which is very different from regular practice.
Completely. I think back to my own failed childhood piano lessons. I would just mindlessly play the same song over and over, make the same mistakes, and call it an hour of practice.
We all did that.
Right. But deliberate practice is the opposite of that. It means setting incredibly painful stretch goals, practicing in absolute solitude, and agonizing over negative feedback to fix your specific weaknesses. It is an exhausting, unglamorous process.
And people constantly confuse that grueling process with the famous concept of flow, developed by Csikszentmihalyi.
Oh, flow state.
Right. Flow is that magical psychological state where you're totally immersed in an activity, time seems to melt away, and the work feels effortless and exhilarating.
The runner's high, basically.
Yes, but deliberate practice and flow are not the same thing. Deliberate practice is the painful, gritty preparation you do in the shadows. Flow is the effortless performance you earn the right to experience because you did that painful practice.
That makes so much sense.
They're two halves of the same coin, but one is work and the other is the reward.
That is such a crucial distinction. You can't expect the practice to feel like the performance. Now, once you've practiced enough to actually get good at something, your interest starts to mature. This is where we see a shift from the self to society, stepping into the realm of purpose.
Stage 3.
Exactly. The sources differentiate between how we view our daily grind. You can have a job, a career, or a calling.
A big difference between those three.
Huge. A job is just transactional. You are clocking in purely for the material benefits to pay your rent. A career is a bit deeper. It's about personal advancement, getting the next promotion, building your status. But a calling is entirely different.
How so?
A calling is inseparable from your life because you see how your specific work actively helps other people. This perfectly aligns with Simon Sinek's ethos of finding your why.
The example in the text makes this so tangible. They talk about an entry-level subway engineer.
Oh, I remember this.
Yeah, when he first started, it was just a job. He took it because he needed a paycheck. He was just turning wrenches and pulling levers. But over time, as he mastered the mechanics and understood the system, his mindset shifted.
He saw the bigger picture.
Right. He realized that his daily repetitive grind was actually keeping a massive city running. He was helping millions of people get to work and get home safely to their families. The tasks didn't change, but his connection to the outcome did.
That outward focus is what sustains your energy when things get really difficult.
Precise.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because even with a profound sense of purpose, you are going to face massive setbacks. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, hope. Specifically, the battle between learned helplessness and learned optimism.
This is fascinating research.
It is. I was reading the notes on the foundational research here, these somewhat dark experiments with dogs and rats involving mild electric shocks, and it completely reframed how I view resilience. The researchers found that suffering itself doesn't cause a creature to lose hope.
Exactly. What causes hopelessness is the belief that you cannot control the suffering.
The lack of agency.
Animals and humans, who believe they have absolutely no agency or control over their environment, eventually just shut down. They give up, to the point where even if an escape route is later opened right in front of them, they won't take it. The hopelessness has been learned.
So how does that translate to the human concept of hope and bouncing back from failure?
It connects flawlessly to the psychologist Carol Dweck's concept of the growth mindset. How you internally explain your failures dictates whether you maintain hope.
Give me an example.
Imagine two students who both fail a major exam. A pessimist experiences that setback and attributes it to permanent, broad causes. They say, I failed the test because I'm just fundamentally bad at math. I'm stupid.
There's no control there.
Exactly. An optimist, or someone with a growth mindset, attributes the exact same failure to temporary specific causes. They say, I failed because I didn't study the right chapters this time, or I didn't manage my time well.
Which means they can fix it.
Yes. The optimist maintains hope because their internal explanation leaves room for them to change their behavior and alter the outcome next time.
It is entirely about the story you tell yourself. But listen, as much as grit sounds like an absolute superpower, this armor against failure, our sources dive deep into the pitfalls too. It is not a magic bullet, and having too much of it can actually destroy you.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, extreme consistency can actually become a fatal flaw. This is a major, valid critique of Duckworth's heavy emphasis on perseverance.
We've all heard of the sunk cost fallacy.
Right. If you blindly persist with an unwavering, I can accomplish absolutely anything if I just refuse to quit mindset, you can get trapped.
Absolutely.
Imagine an entrepreneur who spends 5 years and their entire life savings developing a new software product. The market is telling them no one wants it. The technology is flawed. But because they are gritty, they refuse to give up. They burn their relationships and their finances instead of pivoting and finding a better idea.
Sometimes quitting is the smartest, most strategic move you can possibly make.
Quitting can be a survival skill.
Wow. Knowing when to quit is just as important as knowing how to endure. And there is another massive debate in these sources regarding the privilege of grit, specifically looking at how socioeconomic factors play into who gets to be gritty.
This is a very sensitive but crucial topic.
It is. Duckworth heavily praises the KIPP charter schools in her work. These are schools located in lower-income areas that use a philosophy of tough love to instill grit in their students. They explicitly train their teachers to praise effort rather than natural talent, and they use highly motivational phrasing like, "It's okay if you can't do this yet." The word "yet" is incredibly powerful for building a growth mindset.
The intention is powerful, but we have to impartially look at the fierce pushback those schools receive from critics and educational scholars. On one hand, the graduation rates are touted as a massive success. But critics ask a really heavy question. Do those high graduation rates simply reflect survivorship bias?
Meaning what, exactly?
The argument is that these schools have very high attrition rates in the early years. Because the environment is so demanding, they essentially shed the lowest performing or most disruptive students, leaving only the naturally driven, already gritty kids by the time high school rolls around.
Which completely skews the data.
Furthermore, there's a serious critique about class expectations. Wealthy students in elite, private schools are often given highly supportive, creative, independent thinking environments. They are taught to question the rules.
While the KIPP students get something else.
Meanwhile, poorer kids in these charter schools are subjected to strict, compliance-based, no-excuses training where walking in straight lines and absolute obedience is demanded. Critics legitimately ask if we are just training one class of kids to be the creative bosses and using grit to train another class of kids to be highly resilient order takers.
That is a profoundly heavy, necessary critique for us to sit with, and it ties directly into the inequality of extracurricular activities, too.
The extracurricular gap is massive.
The research overwhelmingly shows that extracurriculars, things like competitive sports, debate team, marching band, are the absolute best training ground for grit. Why? Because they offer a perfect blend of high interest and high challenge.
Right.
But lower income students often simply lack the money for the registration fees or the transportation to get to a 6 a.m. practice, or the parents who have the flexible work hours to pick them up. This creates a severe grit training gap purely based on income and zip code.
Which is why we have to ask the practical question. If grit is so heavily influenced by our environment and the opportunities available to us, how do we consciously build a gritty ecosystem, whether it's for ourselves, our families, or the teams we manage at work?
Right. So getting down to brass tacks, how do we actually do it? If you're managing a team right now or raising kids, what's the playbook?
The sources point to a framework called wise parenting, which applies just as much to corporate leadership and management.
Okay, wise parenting.
If you picture a grid, wise leadership is the sweet spot in the upper right quadrant. It is highly demanding and highly supportive. You do not lower your standards. You demand excellence. But you provide immense, unwavering emotional backing to help them reach that standard.
Do they give an example of how to do that practically?
There's a fantastic corporate anecdote in the text about a manager who wanted to build this exact culture. He started a daily habit. He would start his morning with 3 coins in his left pocket.
Just loose change.
Yeah, just 3 coins. Every single time he gave specific, meaningful, positive reinforcement to a team member, not just a generic good job, but really recognizing their effort, he moved 1 coin to his right pocket.
And the rule was he couldn't leave the office until all the coins moved over.
Exactly. He wouldn't go home until all 3 coins had switched sides. It forces a leader to look for effort, and it creates a virtuous cycle of motivation and support within the team.
That is such an easy, actionable trick. 3 coins in the pocket. Try that tomorrow at the office. For families, Duckworth has something called the hard thing rule to build grit at home.
I love this rule.
It's simple but strict. Every single person in the family, parents included, has to pick a hard thing. It could be learning the acoustic guitar, running cross-country, learning a new language, whatever. You must practice it daily.
No exceptions.
None. And here is the catch. You cannot quit until a natural stopping point. That means the end of the semester or the final recital or the last game of the season. You absolutely cannot quit on a random Tuesday just because you had a frustrating practice or a bad day. You have to learn how to push through the emotional dip.
And that rule beautifully taps into something psychologists call the co-responsive principle. It's essentially a feedback loop.
How does that loop work?
Researchers ask, do gritty people naturally choose to do hard activities, or do hard activities actually make people gritty? The answer is that it goes both ways. Choosing to do something difficult physically and psychologically changes your mindset. It makes you more resilient for the very next challenge.
You level up.
Exactly. The musician Jack White is a perfect eccentric example of engineering this loop. He intentionally uses cheap, plastic, out-of-tune guitars. Yes. He purposely places his instruments uncomfortably far apart on stage, so he literally has to sprint to hit a chord in time. He does this because he believes injecting physical difficulty into his process forces him to fight for the music. It sparks his creativity and violently guards against them getting complacent.
He is literally manufacturing his own friction to stay sharp. I love that. Okay, so we have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. Let's synthesize this journey for you. Grit isn't just stubbornly banging your head against a brick wall because some motivational poster told you never to quit.
Definitely not.
It is a highly strategic, carefully calibrated mix of behaviors. It requires playfully exploring your interests until you find a focus. It means enduring the very real, unglamorous pain of deliberate practice. It involves connecting your daily grind to a higher purpose that serves others.
And crucially, it demands maintaining a growth mindset.
That absolute, unwavering belief that you are in control of your own destiny and that failure is just data for the next attempt.
And, perhaps most importantly, it requires doing all of this while remaining flexible enough to know when your tactics aren't working, and leaning on a demanding but supportive community to keep you accountable.
So what does this all mean? It means that while natural, innate talent might give you a really shiny head start off the blocks, it is the quiet, unglamorous consistency of your effort that ultimately determines where you cross the finish line.
This raises an important question, though, something for you to mull over after you finish listening today. Toward the very end of the source material, there is a brief mention of social investment theory.
Right.
This theory notes that grit naturally increases as we age, largely because society thrusts incredibly demanding roles onto us. We start our careers, we have children, we take on mortgages, we become gritty because our social roles absolutely demand it from us.
We don't have a choice.
Right. But if our grit is largely a response to the heavy expectations of society, what happens when we retire? When society stops demanding productivity from us, do we inevitably lose our grit? Or is it possible for us to consciously construct new hard things to keep our minds sharp, passionate, and resilient until the very end of our lives?
Wow. That is an incredible thought to walk away with. What is your hard thing going to be when absolutely nobody is making you do it? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you some clarity, a few aha moments, and the motivation to go out there and tackle your own hard thing today.